Elena Brooks stood frozen in the doorway of what used to be her home, watching her husband James load the last trunk onto the wagon. The blonde woman beside him, Sarah Mitchell, barely 23, smiled like she'd won something precious. James turned, met Elena's eyes for the first time in 3 days, and spoke 5 words that shattered 8 years of marriage. "The house is yours. Goodbye." No explanation, no apology, just cold dismissal. Sarah laughed, actually laughed as the wagon pulled away, and Elena realized the entire town had gathered to watch. She wasn't just losing her husband, she was becoming their cautionary tale. Then a voice cut through the whispers. "He didn't lose you. He gave up something rare." Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and follow Elena's journey to the very end. Comment below with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. The voice belonged to Lucas Hale, and Elena hated him for it. Not because the words were cruel, they weren't, but because they forced her to feel something other than the blessed numbness that had been holding her together since dawn. She spun toward him, ready to unleash fury on someone, anyone, but the look on his face stopped her cold. Pity. She'd expected pity. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like anger. "Don't," she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. "Don't you dare make this about something it's not." Lucas stepped closer, ignoring the crowd that had formed a loose circle around them like spectators at a hanging. He was tall, weathered by years of ranch work, with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. "I'm not making it about anything. I'm stating a fact. Your fact is based on knowing nothing about my marriage. I know he left you for a girl young enough to be his daughter. I know he waited until you were sick with fever last month to start courting her. And I know every man in this town saw it coming and said nothing because they were too busy protecting one of their own." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Elena felt heat rush to her face, not from embarrassment, but from rage so pure it made her hands shake. "Get off my property." "It's not your property," a voice called from the crowd. Thomas Weatherby, the bank manager, pushed forward with the kind of confidence that came from holding other people's debts. "Legally, it belongs to your husband. He has every right to sell it, and I have a buyer ready to make an offer." Elena's stomach dropped. "James signed the deed over to me 3 days ago. A deed signed under duress isn't legally binding. Your husband claims you threatened him." The lie was so absurd, so perfectly calculated to destroy her, that Elena actually laughed. "I threatened him I was in bed with pneumonia when he started sleeping with that girl. I could barely stand." "So you say." Thomas pulled out a folded document. "I have a signed statement from Mr. Brooks detailing your erratic behavior, your violent outbursts, and your refusal to fulfill your wifely duties." The crowd murmured. Elena saw women she'd called friends turn away, their faces carefully blank. She saw men nod as if they'd suspected all along that she was the problem. And she saw Sarah Mitchell still sitting in that wagon, 200 yards away, watching with satisfaction. That's a lie. Courts don't usually side with abandoned wives, Mrs. Brooks, especially when the husband has witnesses. Witnesses to what? To your refusal to bear children. To your interference in your husband's business dealings. To your, shall we say, unnatural interest in books and education rather than proper domestic duties. Someone snickered. Elena felt the world tilt sideways. Then Lucas spoke again, and his voice carried across the crowd like a whip crack. "Thomas, you're holding a fraudulent document written by a man who committed adultery and abandonment. Keep talking, and I'll make sure everyone knows the bank is complicit in theft." Thomas's face reddened. "This is none of your concern, Hale." "Elena is my neighbor. That makes it my concern." "She's not your anything, and you'd do well to remember that before you damage your own reputation defending a woman no man wanted to keep." The words hung in the air like poison. Elena felt them sink into her skin, into her bones. No man wanted to keep. That's what she was now. That's what they'd all see forever. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and looked Thomas Weatherby dead in the eye. "Get off my property, and tell James if he wants this house he can come take it himself instead of sending cowards to do his work." Thomas smiled. "He'll be back with the sheriff in 3 days. I suggest you use that time to pack." He turned and walked away, and the crowd followed him like dogs following a butcher. Within minutes, Elena stood alone in her yard with only Lucas Hale for company. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "Now they'll come after you too. Let them try." Lucas picked up a fallen basket near the porch steps, set it upright. "You have 3 days. What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She looked at him sharply. "You think you know me?" "I know you've been teaching the Donnelly children to read in secret because their father thinks education makes girls unmarriageable. I know you've been treating sick livestock for half the ranches in this valley without asking for payment. And I know you stood up to James 6 months ago when he wanted to sell water rights to the mining company that would have poisoned the creek." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. "How do you—" "I pay attention." Lucas met her eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, Elena didn't feel like she was drowning. "You're stronger than they think, stronger than he deserved. So I'll ask again, what are you going to do?" The answer came to her with sudden crystalline clarity. "I'm going to stay. They'll try to force you out. Then they'll have to drag me." Lucas nodded slowly, and something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "You'll need help." "I don't need anything from anyone." "That's pride talking. Pride won't rebuild the fence that's falling down, or fix the leak in your roof, or bring in the harvest you'll need to survive winter." Elena wanted to argue, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She'd been running on fury and stubbornness for 3 days, and suddenly her legs felt like they might give out. "Why do you care?" "Because someone should." It wasn't a romantic answer. It wasn't even particularly kind, but it was honest, and Elena had had enough of pretty lies to last a lifetime. "Fine, help me fix the fence, but I'm paying you." "I don't want your money." "Then we're done here." She turned toward the house, but Lucas caught her arm gently, like she was something that might break. "I'll take payment in meals. I'm a terrible cook." Despite everything, Elena felt her mouth twitch toward something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's still charity. That's fair trade. You feed me, I fix things. Nobody's pride gets hurt." She should say no. She should send him away and prove to herself that she didn't need rescuing. But the truth was, she couldn't do this alone. Not really. Not if she wanted to survive. "1 meal a day, and you work during daylight hours only. I won't have people saying, 'I know what people say. I stopped caring about it years ago. You should try it.'" He released her arm and walked toward the broken fence without waiting for permission, and Elena watched him go, with a strange mixture of irritation and relief. She didn't need rescuing. But maybe, just maybe, she could accept help. The difference she was learning mattered more than she'd ever imagined. That night, Elena sat alone in the house that used to be theirs and made a list of everything she needed to survive. Food, money, firewood, seed for spring planting, a way to prove ownership of the land. The list grew longer with each passing minute, and with it came a creeping realization that 3 days wasn't enough time to solve any of it. She could fight Thomas Weatherby in court, but courts cost money she didn't have. She could appeal to the town council, but the town council was made up of men who'd watched James leave and said nothing. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. Except she wasn't. At dawn, Lucas appeared at her door with lumber nails and a borrowed saw. He didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He just started working, and by noon the fence that had been falling down for months stood straight and solid. Elena brought him lunch, cold chicken and bread, nothing fancy, and he ate it standing up, barely pausing in his work. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I do." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment, and Elena had the unsettling feeling that he was deciding whether to tell her the truth or spare her feelings. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away, and I know what it takes to build yourself back up, and I'll be damned if I watch someone go through it alone when I can help." "Who threw you away?" "My father. Told me I wasn't worth the land I'd inherit, so he left it all to my older brother. Kicked me out when I was 16. Lucas drove another nail home with 3 sharp strikes. "Spent 2 years working other people's ranches for pennies, saved every cent, bought my own land when I was 19, built my own house, and now I own twice what my father ever did." "Did you ever speak to him again?" "He died last year, drunk, in debt. My brother sold everything to cover what he owed." Lucas straightened, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I didn't go to the funeral." Elena absorbed this feeling, the weight of his story settled next to her own. "I don't want revenge." "Good. Revenge is expensive and it makes you mean." He picked up another board. "What you want is survival, then success, then maybe if you're lucky peace. In that order. Always in that order." She watched him work for another hour, and slowly something shifted inside her. Not hope. Hope was too fragile, too easily crushed. But something harder. Something that tasted like determination. She could survive this. She would survive this. And maybe, just maybe, she'd do more than survive. The town meeting happened 2 nights later, and Elena walked into it with her head high and her hands steady. The church hall was packed standing room only, and every face turned toward her as she entered. She saw pity. She saw contempt. She saw curiosity and judgment and a dozen other emotions she didn't have names for. But she didn't see support. Not from anyone except Lucas, who stood in the back with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Reverend Matthews called the meeting to order, his voice heavy with forced solemnity. "We're here to discuss the matter of the Brooks property and the legal dispute regarding ownership." Thomas Weatherby stood holding his fraudulent documents like they were holy scripture. "The facts are simple. James Brooks signed over the property to his wife under duress. The deed is invalid. The land reverts to him, and he has chosen to sell it to Mr. Gerald Morrison, who plans to expand his cattle operation." Elena rose to her feet, and the room fell silent. "The deed was signed 3 days before James left. I was recovering from illness, but I was fully conscious and capable of understanding what was happening. James wanted to ensure I had security if anything happened to him." "So you claim." "So I know." Elena pulled out her own copy of the deed signed and witnessed. "And I have witnesses who were present at the signing." "Witnesses who are where exactly?" Thomas looked around the room. "I don't see anyone willing to stand up for you, Mrs. Brooks." Elena's heart sank as she scanned the faces around her. The Donnelly family, whose children she'd taught to read, looked away. Martha Williams, who she'd helped through a difficult childbirth, studied her hands. Robert Chen, whose livestock she'd treated, shook his head slightly. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a chair scraped against the floor, and Lucas stood. "I was there." Thomas laughed. "You weren't anywhere near the Brooks property 3 days ago." "Wasn't talking about the deed signing. I was talking about the day James started courting Sarah Mitchell. I saw him meet her at the river while Elena was sick. I saw him give her a bracelet that belonged to his wife. And I saw Thomas Weatherby there too, witnessing the whole thing and saying nothing." The room erupted. Thomas's face went purple. "That's a lie." "Is it because I'm willing to swear to it in front of a judge? Are you willing to swear you never saw James with Sarah before he left his wife?" Thomas opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. The silence stretched out like pulled taffy, and Elena felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. Then Reverend Matthews cleared his throat. "Even if Mr. Hale's testimony is accurate, it doesn't change the legal facts. A wife cannot hold property in her own name without a male co-signer. The deed, regardless of its validity, requires James Brooks's continued endorsement. If he chooses to revoke that endorsement, then the land becomes contested property subject to the Homestead Act," Lucas interrupted. "Which means Elena has the right to file her own claim and work the land for 5 years to earn full ownership." That's for unmarried women and widows. She's abandoned. That's legally equivalent in territorial law. Elena's head spun. She'd had no idea any of this was even possible. But Lucas spoke with the kind of certainty that came from research, from preparation, from caring enough to find a solution. Thomas recovered his composure. Even so, she can't possibly work 160 acres alone. The moment she fails to meet the cultivation requirements, the claim becomes invalid. She won't be alone. Every eye in the room turned to Lucas. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. I'll help her work the land, as a business partner. Completely legal, completely proper. We'll file the paperwork tomorrow. The room exploded into arguments, accusations, and wild speculation. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing through implications she didn't fully understand. Lucas was offering to tie his reputation, his time, his resources to her fight. And he was doing it in front of everyone, making it impossible to take back. She should feel grateful. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt furious. As soon as the meeting dissolved into chaos, she cornered Lucas outside the church. What the hell do you think you're doing? Helping you keep your land? By making yourself a target. By giving them ammunition to destroy both of us. They were going to destroy you anyway. At least this way you have a fighting chance. I didn't ask for this. No, you didn't, but you needed it. Lucas's voice was maddeningly calm. Elena, you can be angry at me all you want, but tomorrow morning we're going to the land office and we're filing that claim. Because if we don't, you lose everything. And I'm not going to stand by and watch that happen. Why? The word came out as a shout. Why do you care so much about someone you barely know? For the first time, Lucas's composure cracked. Because I see you. I see who you are underneath all this pain and anger. I see strength and intelligence and a stubborn refusal to break even when everyone wants you to. And I'll be damned if I let this town crush that just because they're too small-minded to recognize value when it's standing right in front of them. Elena opened her mouth to argue, to push back, to maintain the walls she'd built around herself. But the words wouldn't come. Because for the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her, not because they wanted to own her, but because they believed she was worth fighting for. And that changed everything. Elena turned away before he could see the tears threatening to spill over, but Lucas caught her wrist again, that same gentle grip that somehow felt stronger than any force. Don't, she whispered. Don't make me believe in people again. I can't afford it. Then don't believe in people. Believe in yourself. I'm just here to make sure you get the chance. He released her and walked away, leaving Elena standing in the darkness, with her heart hammering and her mind spinning. She wanted to hate him for complicating everything. She wanted to send him away and prove she could do this alone. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying than pride. She needed help, and he was offering it without demanding anything in return. That alone made him dangerous, because it made him different, and different meant unpredictable, and unpredictable meant she couldn't control what happened next. The land office opened at 8. Elena arrived at 7:30, but Lucas was already there, leaning against the hitching post with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested he'd been waiting for hours. You're late, he said, handing her a cup. I'm early. Not early enough. We need to be first in line or Thomas will find a way to delay the filing. He was right. At 7:45, Thomas Weatherby appeared at the end of the street, walking fast with Gerald Morrison beside him. When Thomas saw Elena and Lucas, his face darkened. The office isn't open yet. We're aware, Lucas said evenly. We're waiting. This is a waste of time. The territorial governor won't approve a homestead claim for a woman who abandoned her marriage. Elena's hand tightened around her coffee cup. I didn't abandon anything. I was abandoned. Your husband says different, and his word carries more weight than yours. Only to people who value lies over truth. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. You're making a mistake, Elena. A woman alone can't survive out here. You'll fail within a month and then you'll lose everything anyway. Save yourself the humiliation and sell now while you still can. Who's buying you, Gerald? Or are you just the middleman collecting a fee for forcing me out? Thomas's eyes flashed. Careful. You're already on thin ice. Don't make enemies you can't afford. Too late. Elena met his stare without flinching. You became my enemy the moment you sided with a man who committed adultery and abandonment over a woman who's done nothing wrong. Gerald Morrison spoke for the first time, his voice oily smooth. Mrs. Brooks, I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for the land. Enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere people don't know your situation. My situation is that I own 160 acres of good land, and I'm not selling. You don't own anything. Not legally. Not yet. Gerald smiled, showing too many teeth. And by the time you figure out how to file the right paperwork, I'll have already purchased it from your husband. Lucas set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. James can't sell land he doesn't own. The deed transfer is legal. Elena owns the property. And as of this morning, she's filing a homestead claim that will solidify that ownership beyond any dispute. On what grounds? Abandonment. Territorial law is very clear. A woman whose husband leaves her is entitled to claim property as head of household. She's still married. Doesn't matter. Abandonment supersedes marital status in property law. Thomas looked ready to explode. You've been studying. I have. And you think you know more than the bank's legal counsel? I think your legal counsel is more interested in his commission than in actual law. The land office door opened and a clerk appeared, a nervous young man named Peter who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. We're open. Elena walked past Thomas and Gerald without another word, Lucas close behind her. Inside, she placed her documents on the counter. The original deed, her marriage certificate, a notarized statement detailing James's abandonment. Peter examined everything with shaking hands. I'll need to verify. It's all in order, Lucas said quietly. And you know it is. But Mr. Weatherby said, Mr. Weatherby doesn't work for the land office. You do. File the claim. Peter looked between them, then at Thomas, who'd followed them inside, then back at the papers. Elena held her breath. Everything hung on this moment, this one clerk's decision. I'll need 3 days to process. No. Lucas's voice cut like steel. You'll file it today, right now, because if you don't, I'm going to the territorial capital tomorrow to report that the Dry Creek Land Office is accepting bribes to delay legitimate claims. Peter went white. I'm not, I would never. Then prove it. File the claim. For 5 endless seconds, nobody moved. Then Peter picked up his stamp, pressed it to the documents, and wrote the date in careful script. Filed. Official as of 8:03 a.m., September 14th, 1883. Elena's knees nearly buckled. Lucas caught her elbow, steadying her. Thank you, she managed. Peter wouldn't meet her eyes. You have 5 years to prove cultivation and improvement. If you fail to meet the requirements, the claim becomes void. I understand. Outside, Thomas was waiting. You think you've won something. You haven't. You've just made this harder on yourself. Good, Elena said. I prefer hard. It builds character. She walked away with Lucas beside her, and for the first time since James left, she felt something that might have been triumph. It lasted exactly 4 hours. The school board met at noon, and Elena attended, expecting a routine discussion about hiring her as the new teacher. Instead, she walked into an ambush. Reverend Matthews sat at the head of the table, flanked by Thomas Weatherby and 4 other men whose faces broadcast their verdict before anyone spoke. Mrs. Brooks, thank you for coming. I was told you needed to discuss my teaching position. We do. Unfortunately, given recent events, the board has decided to pursue other candidates. Elena's stomach dropped. What recent events? Your decision to file a homestead claim in partnership with Mr. Hale has raised concerns about your judgment and moral character. Lucas and I are business partners, nothing more. So you claim. But the appearance of impropriety is enough to disqualify you from teaching our children. Reverend Matthews folded his hands. We need someone who exemplifies proper Christian values. I've been teaching children in this town for 3 years. Nobody questioned my values until my husband abandoned me. Your husband left because of irreconcilable differences. My husband left because he was sleeping with a woman 15 years younger and wanted a fresh start without the inconvenience of a wife. Elena's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. And now you're punishing me for his choices. We're protecting our children. From what? From a woman who's done nothing wrong, or from the uncomfortable truth that one of your own committed adultery and you all looked the other way? Thomas stood abruptly. This meeting is over. No, it's not. Elena planted her hands on the table. I need that teaching position. I'm qualified, experienced, and the children trust me. You know this. You all know this. Nevertheless, our decision is final. Reverend Matthews wouldn't look at her. We've offered the position to Mrs. Sarah Brooks. The room tilted. Sarah Mitchell. The woman my husband left me for, she's Mrs. Brooks now. They were married yesterday in Billings. Elena felt the words hit her like physical blows. Married. James had married Sarah before the ink was dry on Elena's homestead claim, and now the town was rewarding his new wife with the job that should have been Elena's. You can't be serious. Mrs. Sarah Brooks is young, energetic, and unmarried. She's married to James. To a respected member of this community, yes, which makes her eminently qualified. Elena looked around the table, searching for one face that showed shame or regret. She found nothing but cold dismissal. This is retaliation. This is a business decision. This is theft. You're taking away my livelihood because I refuse to disappear quietly. Thomas smiled. If you can't afford to maintain your homestead claim, perhaps you should reconsider Mr. Morrison's offer. I'm sure he'd still be willing to negotiate. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about morality or propriety. This was about forcing her to sell. They'd taken her teaching position to strangle her financially, knowing she couldn't work the land and earn money simultaneously. Without income, she'd default on the cultivation requirements. And without the homestead claim, she'd lose everything. It was elegant, brutal, and perfectly legal. Elena straightened her spine. I don't need your teaching position. I'll find work elsewhere. There is no elsewhere. Every business in Dry Creek answers to this board. Reverend Matthews finally met her eyes. Go home, Elena. Accept your situation. Make peace with your husband or move on. But stop fighting a battle you cannot win. She wanted to scream. She wanted to overturn the table and force them to see what they were doing. Instead, she turned and walked out with her head high and her hands clenched into fists. Lucas was waiting outside. One look at her face and he knew. They refused. Worse, they gave the job to Sarah. Jesus. And they made it clear that no one in town will hire me for anything. Elena's voice shook. They're trying to starve me out. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then, come work for me. What? I need help with the ranch. Bookkeeping, supplies, management, livestock care. It's honest work and I'll pay fair wages. Lucas, I can't. You can and you will. Because the alternative is giving up, and I know you're not capable of that. Elena wanted to argue, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She'd been fighting for days, and every victory was immediately countered by a new attack. She was tired. So desperately tired. What will people say? They're already saying it. Might as well make it worth their while. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. You're insane. Probably. But I'm also right. Lucas extended his hand. Partners. She looked at his hand, calloused and scarred from years of hard work offered without conditions or expectations. She thought about James, who'd promised forever and delivered betrayal. She thought about the school board who'd smiled to her face while sharpening knives for her back. She thought about Sarah who'd stolen a husband and now a livelihood without a shred of remorse. And then she thought about herself, about who she'd been before all this, and who she was becoming. She took his hand. Partners. The work started immediately. Lucas's ranch was smaller than Elena expected: 40 acres of grazing land, a modest house, and a barn that had seen better days. But it was well-maintained, organized, and clearly run by someone who understood efficiency. "I need inventory on all the livestock," Lucas said, handing her a ledger. "Counts health status, breeding schedules. The previous hand kept terrible records." "You had a hand." "Had. He quit 2 weeks ago. Said the work was too hard." Lucas smiled grimly. He wasn't wrong, but hard work never killed anyone. Elena spent the afternoon counting cattle, checking for injuries and illness, noting everything in careful script. The work was physical, dirty, and exhausting. It was also oddly satisfying. Each task completed was proof she could do this, that she wasn't helpless, that abandonment hadn't destroyed her ability to function. By sunset, she'd documented 83 head of cattle, 12 horses, and a small flock of chickens. Lucas reviewed her work without comment, then nodded. "Good. You missed 3 calves in the north pasture, but otherwise it's accurate." "How did you—" "I know my own stock. I wanted to see if you'd be thorough, or if you'd take shortcuts." He closed the ledger. "You were thorough. That matters." Elena felt an unexpected surge of pride. "What's next?" "Next, you go home and rest. We start repairs on your property tomorrow." "I can work tonight." "You've been awake for 20 hours and you haven't eaten since breakfast. Go home." She wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. "Fine, but I'm coming back at dawn." "I'll be here." Elena rode home as the sun set her body aching and her mind quieter than it had been in days. She was still ruined in the eyes of the town. She was still abandoned, still humiliated, still fighting battles on every front. But she was also employed. She was also competent. She was also proving hour by hour that she was more than what James had reduced her to. The house was dark when she arrived. For a moment, standing in the doorway, Elena felt the full weight of loneliness press down on her shoulders. This was her life now. Empty rooms, silent nights. No one to talk to except herself. Then she lit a lamp, made a simple dinner, and sat at the table with her own ledger tracking income, expenses, and the brutal mathematics of survival. She had enough savings for 3 months. Maybe 4 if she was careful. After that, she'd need Lucas's wages to cover basic necessities. And she'd need to start producing something the land could sell: crops, livestock, something that could generate income beyond day labor. It was possible. Barely, but possible. She was writing out a planting schedule when someone knocked on her door. Elena froze. Visitors after dark meant trouble. She grabbed the rifle James had left behind and approached slowly. "Who is it?" "Martha Williams." Elena lowered the rifle and opened the door. Martha stood on the porch holding a covered basket and looking deeply uncomfortable. "I can't stay. Harold would be furious if he knew I came." "Then why did you—" Martha thrust the basket forward. "Because you saved my baby's life. And because what they're doing to you is wrong." She turned to leave, then stopped. "They're planning something. Thomas and Gerald. I heard them talking at the store. They said if you won't sell willingly, they'll find another way." "What way?" "I don't know. But Harold said something about the water rights. About how you can't prove a homestead claim without access to water." Elena's blood ran cold. The creek that ran through her property was the only water source for miles. If they found a way to cut off her access— "Thank you for warning me." Martha nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Elena brought the basket inside and found bread preserves and a small jar of honey. Simple gifts. But they carried a message more valuable than gold. She wasn't completely alone. Somewhere in this town, buried beneath layers of fear and social pressure, There were still people who knew right from wrong. She just had to survive long enough for that to matter. The next morning, Elena rode to Lucas's ranch at dawn and found him already saddling horses. "We're checking the creek." "How did you—" "I have friends too. Quiet ones. They hear things." He handed her reins. "If Thomas is going after your water rights, we need to know how before he makes his move." They rode to the northern boundary of Elena's property, where the creek entered from Morrison's land. Everything looked normal, water flowing clear and strong, no obvious signs of interference. But Lucas dismounted and walked the banks, carefully examining rocks and vegetation with the focus of a man who knew what he was looking for. "Here." He pointed to fresh boot prints in the mud. "Someone's been surveying, recently." "For what?" "My guess they're planning to divert the creek before it reaches your property. Probably dam it upstream and redirect the flow." "That's illegal." "Only if they get caught. And who's going to report it?" The sheriff answers to Thomas. "The territorial marshal is 3 weeks away. By the time anyone investigates your claim will already be forfeit for lack of water." Elena stared at the peaceful creek, understanding with perfect clarity that this was where the real battle would be fought. Not in courtrooms or church meetings, but here, in the dirt and water and brutal practicality of survival. "What do we do?" Lucas was quiet for a long time. Then, "We fight back, but not the way they expect." Meaning we don't wait for them to make their move. We make ours first." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "What kind of move?" "We file a water rights claim. Today. Before they can establish any legal precedent for diversion." Lucas remounted his horse. "There's a territorial surveyor in Billings. If we leave now, we can be there by nightfall." "That's a 12-hour ride." 13 if we stop for food. Are you coming or not?" Elena looked at the creek, then at Lucas, then back at the peaceful water that represented the difference between survival and destruction. "I'm coming." They rode hard, stopping only twice to rest the horses. Elena's thighs burned and her back ached, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace. Lucas said nothing, just pushed forward with the kind of determination that suggested he'd done this before. Ridden all day toward something that mattered more than comfort. Billings appeared on the horizon just as the sun touched the mountains. The territorial surveyor's office was closed, but Lucas knew where the man lived, a modest house on the edge of town. He knocked 3 times sharp and insistent. An older man with wild gray hair opened the door, clearly annoyed. "Office hours are 8 to 4. Come back tomorrow." "This can't wait until tomorrow." Lucas pulled out a folded map. "We need an emergency survey and water rights documentation." "Emergency." The surveyor. His nameplate read. Robert Chen squinted at them. "What kind of emergency?" "The kind where someone's planning to illegally divert a creek and destroy a homestead claim." Elena stepped forward. "I'm Elena Brooks. I filed a claim 3 days ago on property in Dry Creek. The water source runs through Gerald Morrison's land before it reaches mine, and we have evidence he's planning to dam it." Chen's expression shifted. Gerald Morrison. That bastard tried the same thing 2 years ago with the Henderson family, nearly bankrupted them before the territorial governor stepped in. He opened the door wider. "Come in. Tell me everything." They spent 2 hours laying out the situation. James's abandonment, the fraudulent documents, the school board's retaliation, Thomas Weatherby's financial pressure, and now the threat to the water supply. Chen listened without interrupting, making notes in a leather-bound journal. When they finished, he sat back and shook his head. "They're playing a long game. Cut off your income, cut off your water, wait for you to default on the homestead requirements. Then, they swoop in and buy the land for pennies." "Can you stop them?" Elena asked. "I can document your legal right to the water, but documentation only matters if someone enforces it. And if the local sheriff is in Morrison's pocket..." Chen trailed off meaningfully. "So what do we do?" "You establish usage, publicly, visibly, in a way that creates witnesses who can't be bought off." Chen pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I'll survey the creek tomorrow and file an official water rights claim on your behalf. But you need to start using that water immediately irrigation livestock, anything that proves you depend on it for the homestead. Lucas leaned forward. And if Morrison diverts it anyway? Then you have grounds for a lawsuit, and more importantly, you have grounds to appeal directly to the territorial governor, bypassing the local authorities entirely. Elena felt hope flicker in her chest. How long does that take? 4 to 6 weeks. Maybe longer if Morrison has connections in the capital. Chen met her eyes. Can you survive that long without water? I'll have to. They left Chen's house after midnight and found a boarding house that would take them for the night. The landlady gave them separate rooms at opposite ends of the hall, but not before making her disapproval abundantly clear, with a long, pointed look at Elena's dusty traveling clothes and disheveled hair. Elena collapsed onto the bed fully dressed, too exhausted to care about propriety or reputation, or anything except the crushing weight of what she'd taken on. She'd gambled everything on a homestead claim she might not be able to defend. She'd tied her survival to a man she barely knew. And now she was racing against people with more money, more power, and more ruthlessness than she'd ever imagined. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by nightmares of dried-up creeks and empty fields. They rode back to Dry Creek at dawn, arriving just as the town was waking up. Elena went straight to her property and started building irrigation channels from the creek to what would eventually be planted fields. The work was backbreaking digging trenches, moving rocks, directing water flow, but she attacked it with frantic energy, knowing every hour counted. Lucas worked beside her, saying little but moving with efficient precision. By noon, they'd established 3 channels that fed water directly into the fields closest to the house. That's not enough, Elena said, wiping sweat from her forehead. We need more visible usage, something Morrison can't ignore. Livestock, lots of it. Lucas straightened, surveying the land. If we bring cattle down to the creek to drink, establish a regular pattern, that's usage. Morrison can't dispute without looking like he's deliberately sabotaging you. I don't have cattle. I do. 40 head I can rotate onto your land legally as part of our partnership. Elena started to protest, then stopped. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Do it. The cattle arrived that afternoon, driven by 2 ranch hands Lucas had hired from a neighboring county men who had no loyalty to Thomas Weatherby or Gerald Morrison. They set up a grazing rotation that brought animals to the creek twice daily, creating tracks disturbing vegetation and leaving unmistakable evidence of usage. Elena watched from the porch, calculating costs and timelines and survival odds. She had maybe 6 weeks before Morrison made his move. 6 weeks to prove the homestead was viable. 6 weeks to Elena Brooks. She turned to see Sheriff Tom Dawson, riding up the path, his face grim. Lucas appeared from the barn, moving to stand beside her. Sheriff, what can I do for you? I'm here to serve you with a complaint. Dawson handed her a folded document. Gerald Morrison is claiming you're trespassing on his water rights. Elena's blood ran cold. That's impossible. The creek runs through my property. Originates on his property. He's claiming historical precedence says his family has been using that water source for 20 years, which gives him senior rights under territorial law. That's a lie. This land was unclaimed until 3 months ago when James purchased it. James purchased it from Morrison, and Morrison kept the water rights in the original sale. Dawson's expression was almost apologetic. I've got documentation signed by both parties. Lucas grabbed the papers and scanned them rapidly. His jaw tightened. These are backdated. Look at the ink, it's fresh. And the notary seal is from a county clerk who died 4 months ago. Can you prove that? Can Morrison prove they're legitimate? Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Judge Patterson is holding a hearing tomorrow at 2. You can make your case then. Judge Patterson, who plays poker every Thursday with Thomas Weatherby. That's the judge assigned to this district. If you don't like it, appeal to the territorial court. But that'll take months, and in the meantime, this injunction stands. Dawson pulled out another paper. You're ordered to cease all water usage from the creek until the matter is resolved. Elena felt the ground drop out from under her. You're cutting off my water supply. I'm enforcing a court order, based on fraudulent documents. That's for the judge to decide. Dawson wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. But I have to follow the law. The law. Elena's voice rose. The law that lets men like Morrison steal from women like me. That law. I don't make the rules. I just enforce them. Dawson tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Elena standing with the injunction clutched in her shaking hands. Lucas read over her shoulder, his expression darkening with each line. This is worse than I thought. They're not just claiming water rights. They're claiming you knowingly trespassed on those rights when you filed your homestead claim. If the judge rules in Morrison's favor, your entire claim becomes invalid. Can they do that? They just did. Elena sank onto the porch steps, her mind racing. No water meant no crops. No crops meant no proof of cultivation. No proof of cultivation meant losing the homestead claim. And losing the claim meant losing everything: the land, the house, her last chance at independence. There has to be something we can do. There is. We ignore the injunction. Elena looked up sharply. That's contempt of court. It's survival. Morrison's counting on you being too afraid to fight back. Don't give him what he wants. They'll arrest me. Maybe, but they'll have to catch you first. Lucas extended his hand. The cattle need water. Are you going to let them die of thirst because Morrison filed some papers? Elena stared at his outstretched hand, understanding exactly what he was offering. Not safety, not certainty, just the chance to fight back, even if it meant risking everything. She took his hand. The cattle need water. They kept the irrigation running, kept the livestock rotation going, kept every visible sign of water usage exactly as it had been. And when Sheriff Dawson showed up the next morning with 2 deputies, Elena met them at the property line with her rifle across her knees. Morning, Sheriff. Elena, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not making anything hard. I'm watering my livestock on my property using my water rights. The court says they're not your water rights. The court is wrong. That's not for you to decide. Elena stood slowly, keeping the rifle pointed at the ground. Tom, you've known me for 3 years. You've seen me help this town through illness, through hard winters, through difficulties that would have broken lesser communities. And you know that what Morrison is doing is theft. I can't enforce what I think is right. I enforce what the law says. Then the law is broken. Dawson's hand moved toward his gun, and instantly Lucas appeared from behind the barn, his own rifle ready. The 2 deputies tensed. Don't, Lucas said quietly. Nobody needs to die over water. You're interfering with a lawful order. I'm protecting my business partner from corrupt officials. Lucas didn't raise the rifle, but his intent was clear. You want to arrest Elena, you'll have to go through me first. For a long moment, nobody moved. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the rifle in her hands, could taste the copper tang of fear on her tongue. This was the moment. The point where words became actions, and actions became consequences that couldn't be undone. Dawson broke first. This isn't over. I know. The sheriff and his deputies rode away, and Elena's knees nearly buckled. Lucas caught her elbow, steadying her. That was insane, she breathed. That was necessary. They're testing your limits. You just showed them you have none. I pointed a gun at the sheriff. You held a gun while standing on your own property. There's a difference. Lucas lowered his rifle. But Elena, this escalates from here. Morrison's going to push harder. The judge will rule against you tomorrow. And eventually, they'll come with enough force that we can't hold them off. Then what do? We go over their heads, directly to the territorial governor. That takes weeks. So we buy weeks, however we can. Elena nodded, but her hands were still shaking. She'd crossed a line today, defied a court order, threatened law enforcement. There was no going back from this. No pretending she was just a wronged wife trying to survive. She was a woman at war now, and wars had casualties. The hearing the next day was exactly the farce Elena expected. Judge Patterson listened to Morrison's lawyer present the backdated documents without questioning their authenticity. He nodded sympathetically when the lawyer described Elena's theft of water resources, and he barely glanced at Lucas's evidence proving the documents were fraudulent. "Mrs. Brooks, do you have legal representation?" Elena stood. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor." "Then you're a fool. This court finds in favor of Mr. Morrison. The water rights belong to him by historical precedents. Your homestead claim is hereby suspended pending resolution of the trespass issue. You have 48 hours to remove all livestock and cease all water usage." "Your Honor, those documents are forged." 48 hours, Mrs. Brooks. After that, Sheriff Dawson has authorization to use whatever force is necessary to enforce this order. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Elena walked out of the courthouse with Lucas beside her, her face burning with humiliation and rage. 48 hours, she said numbly. That's not enough time to appeal. It's not meant to be. They're forcing your hand. Lucas guided her toward the horses. But we're not done yet. What else is there? There's always something else. We just have to find it. They rode back to Elena's property in silence. When they arrived, they found Martha Williams waiting on the porch, her face pale. "I shouldn't be here. Harold will kill me if he finds out." "Then why did you come?" Elena dismounted, every muscle screaming. "Because I heard something. At the bank. Thomas and Gerald were talking about what happens after the 48 hours are up." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're not just taking the water rights. They're planning to burn you out." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Burn what?" "Your house, your barn, everything. They're going to make it look like an accident, a lamp knocked over a cooking fire gone wrong. And when you have nothing left, they'll offer to buy the land for a pittance, and you'll be so desperate, you'll take it." Lucas swore viciously. "When?" "Tomorrow night. They're waiting until after the 48-hour deadline, so it looks like you forced their hand." Elena felt her entire world narrow to a single point of crystalline clarity. They were going to destroy everything. Not just take it, but burn it to ash. Erase her from this place as if she'd never existed. "Thank you for warning me." Martha was already backing away. "I can't help more than this. I have children. I can't risk—" "I know. Go." Martha disappeared into the growing darkness, and Elena turned to Lucas. "We need to leave." "Leave. Get out before they come. Take what we can carry and go somewhere else. Start over where people don't know us." Lucas stared at her. "You don't mean that." Don't I? What's the alternative? Stay and fight people who are willing to commit arson to get what they want. Risk dying for 160 acres of land. It's not about the land anymore. It's about whether you're going to let them win. They've already won. They have the law, the money, the power, everything. What do I have? You have me. Lucas grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. And you have yourself. The woman who told Thomas Weatherby to go to hell. The woman who pointed a rifle at the sheriff. The woman who filed a homestead claim when everyone said it was impossible. That woman doesn't run. That woman is tired, Lucas. She's so tired of fighting. I know, but if you run now, you'll never forgive yourself. And more importantly, every other woman in this territory who's being crushed by men like Morrison will lose hope. Because if you can't win, what chance do they have? Elena felt tears burn her eyes. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to survive. Then survive by fighting, not running. She pulled away from him, pacing the porch with her thoughts spinning. Everything in her screamed to leave, to pack a bag right away and never look back, to find some quiet place where nobody knew her name or her shame or her failures. But Lucas was right. Running meant they won, not just against her, but against every woman who'd been abandoned, dismissed, or destroyed by men who saw them as property. If we stay, we might die. If we run, we definitely lose. Lucas leaned against the porch railing. I know which odds I prefer. Elena laughed a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. You're insane. Completely. But I'm also not leaving unless you do. She looked at him, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere and upended her entire life. Who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Who was willing to risk everything for a principle most people had abandoned long ago. Fine, we stay. But we need a plan better than pointing guns at people. Already working on it. Lucas pushed off the railing. How do you feel about setting a trap? Elena's pulse quickened. What kind of trap? The kind where we let them think they're winning right up until the moment they lose. Lucas pulled her inside the house, shutting the door firmly. They're coming tomorrow night to burn you out. So we give them exactly what they expect, an empty house, no witnesses, perfect opportunity. Except we'll be watching. And we'll have witnesses of our own. Who? Everyone in this town is either against me or too scared to help. Not everyone. There's a federal marshal passing through Billings. Robert Chen knows him, sent him a telegram this afternoon explaining the situation. If we can catch Morrison's men in the act of arson, that's a federal crime. The local authorities can't protect them from that. Elena's mind raced through the implications. The marshal won't get here in time. Morrison's moving tomorrow night. Chen's bringing him personally. They'll arrive by late afternoon. Lucas started pulling supplies from his saddlebag. We stage the house to look abandoned. Make it obvious you've packed up and left. Then we hide and wait for them to make their move. And if they don't fall for it, they will. They're arrogant. They think you're broken. His eyes met hers with fierce intensity. Show them you're not. They worked through the night preparing. Elena packed trunks and loaded them visibly onto a wagon, making sure anyone watching would see her apparent retreat. She left curtains open, lamps unlit, doors slightly ajar, all the signs of hasty abandonment. Lucas positioned himself in the barn with a clear view of the house, while Elena took a hidden spot in the root cellar with a rifle and a whistle to signal if anything went wrong. By dawn, the trap was set. Now they just had to wait. The day crawled past with excruciating slowness. Elena sat in the darkness of the root cellar, every nerve stretched tight, listening for sounds that didn't come. She thought about James, about how he'd probably heard by now that she was leaving. He'd be satisfied, vindicated. Proof that she couldn't survive without him. Except she wasn't leaving. She was fighting back in the only way left to her, with cunning instead of force, with patience instead of panic. The sun finally set. Elena heard horses approaching around 8 o'clock, 3 riders moving slowly, cautiously. She risked a glance through the crack in the cellar door and recognized 2 of Morrison's ranch hands. The third man was younger, barely 20, and he looked terrified. "You sure she's gone?" the young one whispered. "Saw her leave this morning with a loaded wagon. House is empty." That was Dale Murphy, Morrison's foreman, a man known for cruelty and corruption in equal measure. "We do this quick and clean. Light it in 3 places so it looks accidental. Nobody gets hurt because nobody's here. Mr. Morrison said to make sure Mr. Morrison isn't here, and what he doesn't know won't hurt him. Now shut up and get the kerosene." Elena's hands tightened on her rifle. They were really going to do it. Burn her home to ash and call it an accident. She wanted to storm out, wanted to confront them, wanted to scream until they understood what they were destroying. But she stayed hidden, stayed silent, and waited for Lucas's signal. The men splashed kerosene across the porch against the walls near the windows. The young one was shaking so badly he dropped the can twice. Dale cursed and grabbed it from him. "This is wrong," the young man said. "She ain't done nothing to deserve this." "She defied a court order. That's enough." "She's just trying to keep what's hers." "Nothing's hers. Women don't own land. They don't own anything except what men let them have. Dale pulled out a match. And when they forget that they need to be reminded. He struck the match. That's when Lucas stepped out of the barn with his rifle leveled. Drop it. Dale froze the burning match inches from the kerosene-soaked wood. The other two men reached for their guns, but Lucas fired a warning shot that sent them scrambling backward. I said drop it. Dale smiled slowly, and Elena's stomach dropped. He wasn't afraid. He was expecting this. You're too late, Hale. Even if you shoot me, the match falls. House burns anyway. And then you're a murderer. Or I shoot your hand and you drop the match in the dirt. 50-50 odds. You feeling lucky. For 3 endless seconds, nobody moved. Then Dale's smile widened, and Elena realized with horror that he didn't care about the odds. He was willing to die just to destroy her home. Elena! Lucas shouted. Get out, now! But Elena was already moving. She burst from the root cellar and tackled Dale before he could drop the match, slamming him into the ground with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. The match flew from his fingers and landed in a puddle of kerosene near the porch. Fire erupted instantly, spreading faster than Elena could have imagined. Lucas grabbed her and hauled her backward as flames raced up the wall, hungry and wild. The 2 ranch hands ran for their horses, but Dale just laughed from the ground. Told you. House burns either way. Elena stared at the growing inferno consuming her home, the place she'd fought so hard to keep, and felt something inside her crack. Not break. Crack. Like ice before it shatters completely. No. She pulled away from Lucas and ran toward the well, grabbing buckets, filling them with desperate speed. Lucas joined her immediately, and together they threw water at the flames over and over, fighting a battle they couldn't win. The fire was too big, too fast, too hungry. Then she heard hoofbeats. Lots of them. Elena spun to see riders approaching from every direction, 20, maybe 30 people. She recognized Martha Williams and her husband Harold. The Donnelly family. Robert Chen from the livery. Even old Mrs. Patterson, the judge's wife, riding side saddle with a determined expression. They descended on the fire like an army, forming bucket chains, beating back flames with blankets, working with synchronized efficiency that spoke of shared purpose. Nobody asked permission. Nobody hesitated. They just fought. Martha appeared beside Elena, taking the bucket from her shaking hands. We heard what they were planning. Couldn't let it happen. Harold said you couldn't risk. I told Harold if he didn't help, I'd leave him. Martha's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Turns out he's smarter than I thought. Harold himself appeared, his face grim as he dumped water on the spreading flames. This ain't right. What they're doing to you, it's never been right. More people joined the fight. Within minutes, 30 people had become 50, then 70, then more than Elena could count. The entire town, or at least the part of it with a conscience, had mobilized to save her home. And slowly, impossibly, the fire began to lose. They fought for 2 hours straight, and when the last ember finally died, Elena's house stood damaged but intact. The porch was destroyed. The west wall was charred black, but the structure held. The house survived. Elena collapsed onto the ground, her lungs burning and her hands blistered. Lucas sat beside her, equally exhausted. Around them, people gathered, dirty and smoke-stained, and unified in a way the town hadn't been in years. That's when the federal marshal arrived with Robert Chen. Marshal William Grant took one look at the scene: Dale Murphy still lying in the dirt with kerosene stains on his clothes, the burned porch, the gathered crowd, and his expression hardened. Someone want to tell me what happened here? Elena stood on shaking legs. These men tried to burn my house down on orders from Gerald Morrison. We have witnesses. That's a lie. Dale scrambled to his feet. We were just passing through and saw the fire. You're covered in kerosene. Marshal Grant grabbed Dale's arm and sniffed. And you smell like you bathed in it. Try again. I want a lawyer. You'll get one. After you spend some time in federal custody for attempted arson and conspiracy to commit fraud. Grant looked at the crowd. "I'll need statements from anyone who saw what happened. And I'll need the original documents regarding the water rights claim." Thomas Weatherby pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. You can't just— I'm a federal marshal investigating crimes that cross territorial jurisdictions. I can do exactly what I want." Grant pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "And right now, I want to talk to you about those backdated documents, the ones notarized by a dead man." Thomas went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then you won't mind answering some questions under oath." The crowd shifted, and Elena saw the exact moment when the power structure in Dry Creek cracked. Thomas looked around for support and found only cold stares. Morrison's ranch hands were already being detained by the marshal's deputies. Even Judge Patterson looked shaken, as if realizing his complicity had consequences beyond local politics. "This isn't over," Thomas said weakly. "Yeah, it is." Marshal Grant snapped the cuffs on Dale Murphy. "And you're going to tell me everything about who ordered this, or you're going to prison for so long you'll forget what freedom feels like." Dale's bravado finally crumbled. It was Morrison. He said to make it look like an accident. Said he'd pay us double if the house burned to the ground. "Did he now?" Grant made a note in a small book. "And the water rights documents. Thomas forged those. I saw him do it. Used old paper and aged ink to make them look authentic." Thomas lunged at Dale, but Harold Williams caught him first. "You stupid— Shut your mouth!" Marshal Grant grabbed Thomas by the collar. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, and about 6 other charges I'll think of on the ride back to Billings. You want to make it worse? Keep talking." Elena watched them load Dale and Thomas onto horses. Their hands bound their faces ashen, with the realization that their carefully constructed scheme had collapsed. She should feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she just felt hollow and exhausted. Lucas touched her shoulder gently. "You did it." "We did it. I couldn't have—" Her voice cracked. "All these people, why did they come?" Martha stepped forward. "Because you didn't give up. Because you showed us what courage looks like, and because we were tired of being afraid." Mrs. Patterson spoke up, her voice quavering but firm. "My husband made mistakes. Bad ones. But he's not beyond redemption. And neither is this town. If you'll let us, we'd like to help rebuild what was damaged." Elena looked around at the faces gathered in her yard, people who'd ignored her, judged her, abandoned her when she needed them most. But they'd also shown up when it mattered. They'd risked social standing and economic pressure to do what was right. "I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's community. The kind we should have shown you from the start." Mrs. Patterson extended her hand. "Let us try again." Elena hesitated, then took the offered hand. The grip was firm, sincere, and it carried the weight of genuine remorse. "Okay, we try again." The crowd dispersed slowly, people making promises to return in the morning with lumber and supplies. Lucas stayed behind, helping Elena assess the damage to the house. The porch would need to be completely rebuilt. The west wall needed new boards, but the roof held and the foundation was solid. "Could have been worse," Lucas said. "Could have been better." Elena touched the charred wood, feeling the heat still radiating from it. "Lucas, I need to tell you something." "What?" "When I saw that fire spreading, when I thought I was going to lose everything, I wasn't thinking about the house. I was thinking about you, about how you'd blame yourself if something happened to me." Lucas went very still. "Elena, I know this is complicated. I know I'm still legally married to a man I hate. I know the town will talk. But I need you to understand that you've become—" She struggled for words that could encompass everything she felt. "You've become essential, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because James was essential once too. And when he left, it nearly destroyed me. If you left, I'm not leaving." Lucas took her hands, blistered and soot-stained. "I'm not James. I'm not going to promise you forever because forever is a word people use when they mean until something better comes along. But I can promise you this: as long as you want me here, I'll be here. And when you don't want me anymore, I'll respect that and walk away clean." Elena felt tears burn her eyes. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "It's also honest, and I figure you've had enough pretty lies to last a lifetime." She laughed, and it turned into a sob, and suddenly she was crying against his chest while he held her with careful tenderness. All the fear, all the rage, all the desperate loneliness of the past weeks poured out in great shuddering gasps. Lucas just held her and let her break. When the tears finally stopped, Elena pulled back and wiped her face with dirty hands. "I look terrible." "You look alive. That's better than terrible. That's a low bar. It's the only bar that matters." He brushed soot from her cheek. "Come on, you can't stay in that house tonight. The smoke will kill you before morning." "Where am I supposed to go?" "My place. I have a spare room. Completely proper." He paused. "Well, proper enough." Elena knew she should refuse. Knew that staying at Lucas's ranch would start rumors that could damage what little reputation she had left. But she was too tired to care, and the truth was, she didn't want to be alone. "Just for tonight. Just for as many nights as you need." They rode to Lucas's ranch in silence, and Elena let herself lean against him, let herself be weak for just a moment. Tomorrow she'd rebuild. Tomorrow she'd fight. But tonight she'd accept help from the one person who'd never asked her to be anything other than herself. Lucas's house was simple, but clean. One main room with a fireplace, a separate bedroom, and a loft that served as the spare space he'd mentioned. He showed her upstairs, gave her clean blankets, and disappeared downstairs without another word. Elena lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else's home, and realized something profound. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of James, not of Morrison, not of the town's judgment. She'd faced fire and betrayal and corruption, and she was still standing. More than standing, she was winning. The thought carried her into sleep, and for the first time since James left, she didn't dream of abandonment. She dreamed of fields heavy with wheat cattle grazing by clear water, and a life built on her own terms. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Elena descended the ladder to find Lucas cooking breakfast with the kind of focused competence he brought to everything. He didn't ask how she slept, didn't make small talk, just handed her a plate and sat down across from her. "Marshal Grant wants to meet with us this afternoon. He's building a case against Morrison and needs our testimony." "What about Thomas?" "Already talking. Gave up Morrison within an hour of arrest. Seems loyalty only goes so far when you're facing federal prison." Elena cut into her bacon thinking about the betrayals that had brought her to this point. Will it stick the charges? Grant thinks so. Arson is serious. Add in the fraud, the conspiracy, the attempted theft. Morrison's looking at 10 years minimum. And my homestead claim, restored. Grant has the authority to overturn the judge's ruling, and he's already filed the paperwork. The water rights are yours. The land is yours. All of it. Elena set down her fork, feeling the weight of those words settle into her bones. Yours. After weeks of fighting, after endless battles against people determined to take everything from her she'd won. Not through luck or charity, but through sheer stubborn refusal to break. I need to see it. The land. Make sure it's real. Lucas understood without further explanation. They rode to Elena's property in the clear morning light, and she dismounted slowly, walking through fields that would soon be planted past the creek that ran clear and strong toward the damaged house that had survived fire and fury. This was hers. Every inch of it. She turned to Lucas, and the words came without thought or hesitation. "Marry me." He went absolutely still. "What?" "Marry me. Not because I need a man to co-sign my claim. Not because the town expects it. But because I want you. Because you fought for me when nobody else would. Because you see me as strong instead of broken." She stepped closer. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't love you. Lucas stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he started laughing deep, genuine laughter that transformed his entire face. What's funny? You, proposing to me in a burned-out yard covered in soot after staying up all night fighting arson. Most women wait for candlelight and romance. I'm not most women. No, you're really not. He sobered his eyes, searching hers. Elena, I'll marry you on one condition. Her heart sank. What condition? That you're sure. Because once we do this, I'm not going anywhere. Ever. And I need to know you're choosing this because you want it, not because you're grateful or scared or trying to prove something. Elena took his face in her hands and kissed him hard and fierce and certain. When she pulled back, she saw everything she needed in his eyes. I'm sure. Then yes, I'll marry you. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped the morning sun, turning everything gold. Then reality crashed back in with the subtlety of a hammer. I'm still married to James. Lucas's jaw tightened. Legally, yes. But he abandoned you. That's grounds for annulment in most territories. Most territories aren't Montana, and most judges aren't friends with the man who forged documents to steal my land. Elena pulled away, pacing through the charred grass. We need a divorce, a real one. Which means James has to agree or I have to prove fault in court. He committed adultery and abandonment. That's fault. That's also expensive, time-consuming, and requires lawyers I can't afford. Elena's voice rose with frustration. Everything I've won, the land, the water rights, the homestead claim, it all means nothing if I'm still legally tied to him. Then we make him agree. How? He has no reason to divorce me. Keeping me married benefits him. I can't remarry, can't fully move on, and he gets to maintain legal claim to any property I acquire. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then his expression shifted into something Elena had never seen before: cold calculation. What if we give him a reason? Something he wants more than the power to control your future. Like what, Tom? Money. A buyout. You pay him to sign the divorce papers and relinquish all claims to the property. Elena laughed bitterly. With what money? Everything I have is tied up in keeping this homestead running. With my money? She stopped pacing. No, absolutely not. Why not? Because then I owe you. Because then this becomes another transaction where a man buys my freedom. Elena's hands clenched into fists. I won't trade one form of dependence for another. It's not dependence if we're partners. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. That's how marriage works. We're not married yet. But we will be. And when we are, my resources become our resources. So stop being stubborn and let me help you finish this. Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentling. Elena, I know you've fought for everything. I know you need to prove you can survive alone, but you've already proven that. Now prove you can accept help without losing yourself. The words hit like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She'd been so focused on independence that she'd forgotten. Independence and partnership weren't mutually exclusive. How much would it take? For James? Probably $500, maybe $1,000 if he's greedy. Elena felt her stomach drop. That's a fortune. That's freedom, and it's worth every penny. She wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but exhaustion and pragmatism won. Fine, but I'm paying you back, every cent, even if it takes years. Deal. Lucas extended his hand, and they shook like business partners sealing a contract. Now let's go make James an offer he can't refuse. Finding James proved easier than expected. He was living in town at the boarding house, apparently having discovered that married life with Sarah wasn't the paradise he'd imagined. The landlady pointed them upstairs with a disapproving sniff. Room 3, and whatever trouble you're bringing, keep it quiet. I run a respectable establishment. Elena knocked once hard. James opened the door looking haggard, His clothes rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. When he saw Elena, he actually flinched. "What do you want?" "To make you an offer." Elena pushed past him into the room. It was small, cramped, and smelled of whiskey and regret. Sarah was nowhere in sight. "Where's your wife?" "Left. Turns out she married me for money I don't have." James laughed without humor. "Funny how that works." "Hilarious." Elena felt zero sympathy. "I'm here to buy a divorce." James's expression shifted from self-pity to calculation. "Buy $750 cash. In exchange, you sign papers relinquishing all claims to me, the property, and any future assets I acquire. Clean break. Forever." "That's a lot of money for someone who's supposedly destitute." "That's my offer. Take it or leave it." James looked between Elena and Lucas, his eyes narrowing. "You're with him now, the cowboy who thinks he's a hero." "I'm with someone who treats me like a human being instead of property. Novel concept, I know." Elena crossed her arms. "Do we have a deal or not? Make it 1,000. $750 is already generous considering you abandoned me with nothing." "You got the house." "You mean the house you tried to have burned down?" Elena's voice turned to ice. "I know about Morrison's plan. I know Thomas forged those documents at your request. And I know you stood by while they tried to destroy everything I built. So don't negotiate with me like you have leverage. You have nothing except a prison sentence waiting if I decide to press charges." James went pale. "You wouldn't." "Try me. I've already ruined Morrison and Thomas. You think I'd hesitate to add you to the list?" Elena pulled out a folded document. "This is the divorce agreement. Sign it, take the $750, and leave Montana. Or refuse, and I'll make sure every crime you've committed becomes public record. Your choice." For a long moment, James just stared at her. Then he started laughing low and bitter. "You've changed. I've grown up, something you never managed. I loved you once, you know, when we first married, before you became so difficult." Elena felt rage bloom hot in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I was never difficult. I was just unwilling to be silent. You couldn't tell the difference." James grabbed the document and skimmed it with shaking hands. "This says I can never contact you again. Never set foot on your property. Never exercise any control over my life. Yes, that's the point." He looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the petulant resentment she'd grown to recognize. "Fine. Give me the money and I'll sign." Lucas counted out $750 in careful stacks. James grabbed it with greedy hands and scrawled his signature across the divorce papers without reading further. Elena witnessed it, Lucas witnessed it, and just like that, 8 years of marriage dissolved into nothing. "Get out of Montana," Elena said quietly. "If I ever see you again, I'll finish what I started." James shoved the money into his pockets and pushed past them without another word. Elena watched him go, feeling nothing except relief so profound it made her lightheaded. "It's done," she whispered. "It's done." Lucas put his arm around her shoulders. "You're free." They filed the divorce papers that afternoon with a clerk who looked scandalized but processed them anyway. Marshall Grant co-signed as a federal witness, giving the documents weight that transcended local politics. By sunset, Elena Brooks was legally single, legally independent, and legally entitled to every choice she made going forward. "How do you feel?" Lucas asked as they rode back toward her property. "Terrified, relieved, angry, free." Elena laughed shakily. "I don't know how I feel. I've been fighting for so long I forgot what it's like to just exist." "You'll figure it out." "Will I?" "Elena, you've survived abandonment, social ostracism, legal fraud, attempted arson, and a corrupt judicial system. I think you can handle peace." She wanted to believe him, But peace felt foreign, uncomfortable, like a coat that didn't quite fit. She'd defined herself through struggle for so long that she didn't know who she was without it. They reached her property as the sun touched the horizon, painting the damaged house in shades of gold and amber. People were already there. Martha Williams directing a crew, rebuilding the porch. Harold hauling lumber, the Donnelly family replacing charred boards on the west wall. Mrs. Patterson was supervising from a chair someone had brought for her, calling out instructions with surprising authority. "What is this?" Elena dismounted slowly, staring at the organized chaos. Martha looked up and smiled. "We told you we'd help rebuild. Did you think we were lying? I thought you'd help eventually, not immediately." Eventually is how good intentions die. Martha hammered a nail with efficient precision. "Besides, you need a house to get married in. Can't have a wedding without a home." Elena felt her throat tighten. "How did you—" "Small town. Word travels fast. Lucas's ranch hand mentioned something to the blacksmith, who told his wife, who told everyone at church." Martha grinned. "Congratulations, by the way." The crowd erupted into applause and well-wishes, and Elena felt tears burn her eyes for the 100th time that week. These people, the same ones who'd turned away when she needed them, were here now rebuilding what had been destroyed, proving that redemption was possible if you were willing to work for it. Lucas squeezed her hand. "Told you this town wasn't completely rotten. Just mostly rotten. I'll take mostly over completely any day." They worked until full dark, and by the time the last person left, the porch was halfway rebuilt and the west wall was patched. Elena stood in the doorway of her home, damaged, but standing like her, and felt something shift inside her chest. This was what winning looked like. Not perfect, not pretty, but real. Lucas appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." "I need about 12 of these and a full night's sleep." Elena took the cup gratefully. "Lucas, are you sure about this? About marrying me because I'm a lot of trouble." "I'm aware. And I'm stubborn and damaged and probably going to make your life significantly more difficult. Looking forward to it. I'm serious. So am I." Lucas set down his coffee and took both her hands. "Elena, I've watched you fight for your dignity, your freedom, and your future with a kind of courage most people don't possess. You're not easy, but you're real, and after a lifetime of people pretending to be something they're not, real is exactly what I want. Even if real means arguments and complications. Especially then. Because arguments mean you care enough to fight, and complications mean life is interesting." He pulled her closer. "Stop trying to talk me out of this. I'm not going anywhere." Elena kissed him, soft and lingering and full of promises she was finally ready to make. When they pulled apart, Lucas was smiling. "So, when are we doing this?" "The wedding." "Soon. Before I lose my nerve or the town changes its mind about supporting us." "How about Saturday?" Elena blinked. "That's 4 days away." "Long enough to make arrangements, short enough that we can't overthink it." Lucas traced her jawline with his thumb. "Unless you want something fancy." "God, no. Just something simple, honest, real." "Then Saturday it is." They were married at sunset on Elena's property, with the rebuilt porch serving as their altar. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, clearly relieved to be officiating something joyful after months of corruption and conflict. Martha stood as Elena's witness, Harold as Lucas's. The entire town attended, some out of genuine support, others out of curiosity, but all of them present. Elena wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself. Lucas wore his best shirt, and actually looked nervous for the first time since she'd met him. When Reverend Matthews asked if she took this man, Elena didn't hesitate. "I do." Lucas's vows were equally simple. "I take you as my partner, my equal, and my wife. Not because you need me, but because I choose you. And I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life." The kiss was chaste but meaningful, and when they turned to face the crowd as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Marshal Grant approached afterward with official-looking papers. Wedding gift. The territorial governor reviewed your homestead claim personally after I sent him the details of Morrison's fraud. He's granting you full ownership immediately, no 5-year waiting period. The land is yours free and clear. Elena felt her knees go weak. You're serious? Completely. You've more than proven your ability to work the land. And the governor wants to send a message that corruption won't be tolerated in territorial courts. Grant extended his hand. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. You've earned this. Mrs. Hale. Elena rolled the name around in her mind and found it fit better than she'd expected. Not because she needed a man's name, but because she'd chosen it. Chosen him. Chosen this life. The celebration lasted until midnight, with food and music and laughter that felt almost foreign after months of struggle. Elena danced with Harold, with Robert Chen, with men who'd ignored her and women who'd judged her, but were all trying to make amends in their own imperfect ways. When the last guest finally left, Elena and Lucas stood alone in the yard of their home, no longer just hers, or just his, but theirs, and looked at the future stretching out before them. Scared? Lucas asked. Terrified? You? Same. But the good kind of terrified. Elena laughed and leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. What happens now? Now we live, plant crops, raise cattle, build a life that's ours by choice instead of circumstance. Lucas kissed the top of her head. And we prove to everyone watching that a woman's worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves. It's determined by who she becomes when she stops letting other people define her. Elena felt tears slide down her cheeks, not from sadness or rage or desperation, but from something simpler and infinitely more powerful: relief, peace, hope. 3 years later, Elena stood in the same yard and watched the sun rise over fields heavy with wheat. The house had been expanded 2 new rooms, a proper kitchen, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn was twice its original size, filled with livestock that bore her brand. The creek ran clear and strong, feeding irrigation channels that turned dry land into abundance. Lucas appeared beside her, their daughter balanced on his hip. Little Sarah, named not for the woman who'd tried to destroy them, but for the Hebrew word meaning princess, reached for Elena with chubby hands. Mama. Elena took her daughter and held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of innocence and possibility. She thought about the woman she'd been when James left, broken, desperate, convinced her worth died with her marriage. And she thought about who she'd become: a landowner, a wife by choice, a mother, a woman who'd rebuilt herself from ash and fury into something stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The town had changed too. Thomas Weatherby was serving 10 years in federal prison. Gerald Morrison had lost everything: his land, his reputation, his freedom. Judge Patterson had retired in disgrace, replaced by a woman from Billings who believed in justice over corruption. And James had vanished into whatever hole people crawled into when shame finally caught up with them. Martha appeared on the path, bringing fresh bread and news. Mrs. Davidson just filed a homestead claim. Says if you could do it, so can she. Elena smiled. Good for her. There are others talking about it too. Women whose husbands left or died. Women who never married. Women who are tired of depending on men's charity. Martha's eyes shone with something that looked like revolution. You started something, Elena. Something that's spreading. I just wanted to survive. You did more than survive. You showed us what's possible. Martha hugged her quickly. That matters more than you know. After Martha left, Elena stood with her daughter in her arms and her husband beside her, looking at the life they'd built together. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Earned through blood and fire and stubborn refusal to accept someone else's definition of her worth. Lucas squeezed her hand. Any regrets? Elena thought about James, about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, convinced she was worthless. She thought about standing in front of the town and being judged, dismissed, attacked. She thought about the fire and the fear and the endless battles that had brought her to this moment. Not one. Good, because I'm not done building yet. Was thinking we could expand the cattle operation, maybe add some horses? Lucas. Yeah. Shut up and enjoy this moment. He laughed and pulled her closer, and they stood together in the golden morning light, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by choice, and defined not by what had been taken from them, but by what they'd built together. Elena had been called worthless, difficult, unwanted. She'd been abandoned, betrayed, and nearly destroyed. But she'd survived every attempt to break her, and in surviving she'd discovered something powerful. Her value had never depended on who loved her, or who left her. It had always been there, waiting for her to recognize it, claim it, and build a life worthy of it. She'd been a treasure all along, rare, valuable, and worth fighting for. She'd just needed to believe it herself before anyone else could see it. And now, standing in the home she'd built with her own hands and her own choices, she finally understood what freedom really meant. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of choice. Not perfection, but possibility. Not someone else's dream, but her own hard-won truth. She was Elena Hale, landowner, wife, mother, and survivor. And she was finally, completely, triumphantly free.